All right, hey everyone, welcome. You're watching this pre-recorded video about a cultural formulation interview, the CFI, and how it impacts cultural humility in the counseling relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about these topics, have a few activities, and if you have any questions, my email is going to be at the end of the PowerPoint. You can feel free to email me. So, who am I? My name is Ashley Garrett, and I am a LPCS and also a registered play therapist supervisor. I have a group practice in Alabama with 4 locations throughout the state and have been practicing for 20 plus years at this point. Um, and in my group practice, one of the things that I noticed, especially over the last decade, is that for many of my clinicians, the things that increase stress whenever clinical caseload gets higher, or as students then launch into the field as an associate licensed counselor, is that many times they're finding things within their own culture and within their own past that come up in session as they start caring for clients. So, this is a great tool that's not just helpful for better understanding your clients as they come in and what culture that they are coming from, their point of views, but also how does your own values and your own culture impact how you show up as a counselor. So we're going to talk a little bit around those. We've got some activities we're going to do. We will be using the Brave Play Kit. If you have one, you could go ahead and find it and bring it to use while we walk through this. There's going to be a couple of times where we pause and then we come back and talk about an activity. If you don't, I have provided in the email, or your teacher has provided a PDF version of a Brave Play Kit. You're going to want to make sure that you have that pulled up and accessible as we go through this presentation. So again, what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about the CFI, or also known as the Cultural Formulation Interview. We're going to talk about the research behind the CFI, and we're going to talk about how to use the Brave Play Kit for your own counselor development as well as in session. All right, so let's just start by doing a Brave Play activity. I'm going to pause while you work on this. But the first one is I want for you to pick a couple of things from the kit that represent you as an individual. I'm going to do these as well as we follow along just to give you an example. And if we were in a small group setting or I was in your classroom, we would break, we would talk about these in small groups. But what you're going to do for this activity to turn into your teacher is you're going to pick 2 or 3 items. Then you're going to jot down what you picked and just a sentence or 2 that comes to mind about why you picked that. Okay, so we're going to walk through these together, but just to give you an idea, that's where we're headed. And I'll pull my Brave Play Kit out and show you that as well. So let's start with the first one. Choose 2 or 3 items that represent you as an individual. Okay, so I'm going to put our Brave Play Kit up here on the screen. I'm also going to grab mine. So it comes either in a white canvas bag or a little black one. If you have one, you may have this one. And just pick a couple of things that speak out to you as an individual. Feel free to pause the video right here. Once you've picked a couple of things, you can then come back and you can listen to the discussion piece, okay? Okay, so maybe you've paused and now you're returning back. What you should be able to have is picked 2 or 3 items that tell about you as an individual and written down some words that come to mind. So for me, I picked the one on here that is sort of toward the bottom, and it's a token that says Subway for Times Square. I picked this one because as an individual, I really value being able to travel and to meet new people and to experience different cultures from where that culture is, whether it's going into a city that is within my state, or if it's traveling to another country, taking a cruise and meeting a variety of people. I love to travel. So being able to have that experience and widen my worldview is something that is important to me. The other thing I picked is if you look toward the middle and the top, is there's a stick with 2 marshmallows on it. I really love to hike and camp and be outdoors. And that's the thing that really brings me a lot of calm and is a lot of fun for me as an individual. Okay. All right. So our next question, if I go back to the slide, is who is to go through and pick one or two items that represent something that you embrace about your culture. Okay, so think about your culture, and we're going to go in depth during this presentation on what that means. But just you right now, what does something that represents your culture? I want you to pick one or two things, and then you're going to pause the video and come back, and then we're going to talk about what you picked. All right, so you should have had time to pause the video and restart the video and get settled. And so you're coming back to this video after picking two or three of the items that um, tell me about your culture, and you've written down some thoughts that go with that. Again, you're going to be writing this down and turning this into your teacher at the end of this if you're doing this for the class. So the things that I picked for my culture is going to be the mountains. If you see it in the middle, it's sort of turned sideways. And I picked the mountain range because a thing about my culture is the culture of which I thought I grew up in versus really where I, quote, came from was actually two different cultures. So I feel like it's been this roller coaster ride, just sort of up and down those hills. I thought that my family itself, like many people who were raised in the South, I thought that maybe that my culture was Cherokee Indian. I was told that growing up. We had pictures of family. And then later, when I did a DNA test, I found out that there was absolutely no Cherokee in me. So that was harder to really wrap my head around than I would have expected because I had this idea of where I came from. I had spent time learning about my quote culture that I came from, and then to find out that that wasn't the case took a little adjustment on sort of what is culture for me. Um, the other thing that I picked for my culture was the ladder that's on the far left and the guy that's on his knees that looks like he could be praying. He could be doing multiple things, but I took it as he's praying. Because two things that were important in my family growing up was religion, somewhat leaning towards more dogmatic in religion, and also the latter because the idea of working hard and pulling yourself up is a process, and you had to work really hard to sort of move up, per se. So, those were two things that really stuck out with me in my culture. So, you've written down some things for you. So, now we're going to go back to our next question, which is choose one item that represents something about your culture that embarrasses you or makes you uncomfortable, even. Okay. So, I want you to take a minute, pick something, one or two things that come to mind that have maybe embarrassed you about your culture, either for now or maybe even in the past, and pause the video, make your notes, and then when you're ready, we'll go ahead and start the video again. Okay, so the thing for me that I picked was actually not on the screen that you're looking at, but I pulled something from my actual physical brave play kit that I have in front of me, and it probably can't see it very well on the screen, but I picked this little hedgehog here. Okay. And the reason I picked that is because sometimes it's been hard for me to to look at as my values and beliefs as a counselor sometimes are a lot different than the values and beliefs that I was raised in, especially when we are looking at abiding by the ACA Code of Ethics. Um, just looking at if tend to personally lead more progressive, especially socially, from my political views and my personal values. But, very much can see a lot of times how family or friends are caught up in their own personal religious beliefs and how that doesn't line up with what I believe as an individual or what my ACA Code of Ethics requires me to hold up as a therapist. For example, um, it is part of our ACA Code of Ethics that we be prepared to work with all populations. A thing I see in my clinic that we have to work through clinicians with is, let's say I have a person who wants to do marriage counseling, a clinician who wants to be a marriage counselor, but they do not believe that people of the same sex should be married. Okay. The law says that this is legal, and the Code of Ethics tells me if I'm going to be a couples therapist, that I need to be competent in working with all couples, and that I can't just choose to work with couples of one population versus another. So, for many clinicians, that is a real struggle. And that's not what this video is about. But for me, as far as something that can be embarrassing for me, is that when I see people being oppressed within a certain religious group because of their sexual orientation. Okay, so that's for me. Another one that's not up here, but just to give you an example, is it could be just being embarrassed about coming from a place that maybe doesn't value education. That people think that a lot of times people, as they get educated, become too proud or too trying to think of the right word here, better than them, when people are just trying to be educated to better their life and to be able to provide for their family. So those are two things that I have seen in my family of origin, that and in my culture that can be embarrassing at times. So again, you're going to write down your thoughts for you. What are some things about your culture that come to mind and that can sometimes be a little cringeworthy? Okay. So I'm not going to touch on particularly the ACA Code of Ethics today because I know that you're getting that a lot in your class. But what I do want to talk about is bringing forward the Association for Play Therapy, their standards of practice. And you're going to see similar language in the NBCC's Code of Ethics and, of course, in our ACA Code of Ethics. For the state of Alabama, you probably already know this, but just a reminder that the ABEC, which is the Alabama Board of Examiners and Counseling, they have the codes of standards that are standards of practice that you, as a licensed clinician, associates or full, are required to abide by. In Alabama, you're going to see a lot of overlap in the ACA Code of Ethics and that ABEC standards of practice. Okay, but they are two different documents, so that you can sort of put that in your head to remember as you approach licensure. Okay, but similar things you're going to see. Non-discrimination, that play therapists do not discriminate or condone discrimination based upon age, color, culture, disability, and so forth, that you can see here. Also the importance of respecting individual differences, participate in the provision of interventions that show understanding of a diverse culture background. So, the goal with teaching you the CFI and how to use it with adults and even with children is going to help give you a tool to be able to shift your interventions to meet that client where they are within their culture. Also, we want to do this with our educational needs. being able to give therapy and education in a way that is consistent with what the client's abilities are, any physical restrictions. They even go as far as to say general temperament, interest, aptitude, social skills, right? So, again, we're working to meet that client where they are so that we can give them the best clinical therapy, the best approaches, interventions that we can. And also in continuing education, it's our job to educate ourselves. It's not our client's job to educate us. And so it's our job to be curious and we can ask clarifying questions. But we also want to do the legwork. We want to go out and read the articles, read the books, interview people. It's not our client's responsibility to educate us about their culture as a whole. Now, you're going to hear a little bit different phrasing of that later because every culture really can be more individualized. So, what could that look like is me saying, hey, I've been reading about your culture. I had a client who is Muslim. And I said, I've been reading a lot about the culture of a Muslim woman. And I've got some clarifying questions. Can you tell me what of this matches up with you as an individual within that culture? So I'm coming with some information and then I'm allowing them to say, yeah, I feel that. No, that's not me. Right. They can go through that information with me and that can give me a better understanding of them as an individual within that culture. And educational needs. It's a place therapist needs to recognize the vulnerability of a client and not impose their personal attitudes, beliefs on their client. So we used to call this and really use the word bracket to think about me taking my personal values and to being able to hold them in a place until I can leave that session. Okay. Um, Now, the thing is, and what the goal of this is, this training at the end, is for you to be able to know what areas are you going to struggle bracketing. So don't feel like when you get to the end of this, it's like, oh, I can't struggle. No, the goal is that you are aware of where you are struggling. So, what are the things about your culture? What are the things about your values that you have that could show up in session and lead the client in a way that isn't authentic to them. Okay. And we're going to give you some examples of what that looks like in our time together. Um, this is going to be in your references. This is a good research article that I provide. That it's just an overview of the relational cultural theory, or also it's targeted to be a type of therapy. There's some things on here that are helpful, and I'm going to give you that article. But the relational or the RCT is talking about it's interpersonal focused, it's culturally attuned. Cultural humility is present in that session with that therapist, which fosters growth in that therapeutic alliance. The research for cultural humility shows us that I don't have to be culturally competent in every client's culture. I don't have to know the intricate details of every client's culture going into that session. But what is the most helpful in building therapeutic rapport is that I acknowledge that that client brings their own culture and that I am open to asking questions and learning about it. The reason is because from the therapeutic point of view, is it honors that client for who they are as an individual, but it also culture gives us a lot of strengths that we can pull from just naturally, and we don't want to lose those protective factors because we aren't asking the right questions. Okay. Core concepts in the RCT are going to be connection and disconnection. So this is we're going to come back to this one and talk about this. Exploring of sociocultural influences. So what does influence this client? How is their culture influence why they're coming to counseling? Mutual empathy and growth fostering relationships. and then creativity. Okay. So let's go back though to connection and disconnection, because what happens is I'm going to make these bids. Excuse me. I'm going to make these bids to connect with this client. I may not get it right. I may mess up something, and there's going to be a disconnection or a rupture. Okay. This happens in all relationships and friendships and marital relationships and employee relationships with coworkers or with your supervisor. But the idea is that we will want to be in connection with other humans. When there's a disconnection and a breach in that for whatever reason, the therapist's goal is to come back to that and make another bid for connection, to talk through what happened in that disconnection. What is it that I said, or how was it that I presented that created that rift or that disconnection in therapy? We're going to talk about it, resolve it, and then move back into connection. That dance happens many times in ongoing therapy, because sometimes we do have to call our clients out on some stuff and they may get defensive. We are trained to do that in a way that is therapeutic. But remember that counselor client relationship is modeling what that client needs even outside of the session. So it's okay that we have these ruptures. It's the coming back and reconnection where that relationship goes deeper and levels up. That teaches our client in a safe space how to do that so that they can then do it in the real world. Okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit about connection and disconnection as we go forward. So for some of our play therapists, and I got this resource at the end for you, we think about what does intersectionality in the playroom mean. So Jeff Ashby is an excellent speaker. He talks about consistently working to understand um, all the dimensions of a client's experience rather than just this one experience that maybe they're coming to you with. We want to understand all the facets that got them to where they are. Jason Grant speaks about some advice is talk about practical issues. So everything from is your intake form inclusive to is your space ADA compatible, both the building and the playroom. And then another talks about it's respectful and ethical to learn all that one can about the culture of a client and of that family. And we've talked about that in the slides before. But when we work with the children and the caregivers who respect and understand, how does power and privilege show up in session? Is there a difference in privilege that we're coming already as a therapist from a more power dynamic? And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make that client feel and to move ourselves on even ground. Okay. And then, have you asked your client how they feel in their world? I love this question. We're going to talk a lot about what does a client's world look like, and getting from them, how do you feel in this world? Do you feel like an alien in this world and that you're an outsider, or do you feel like you're really at the heart of what's happening in your culture? So, typical questions that you're going to see on any kind of assessment form. You may have a question about religion. What's your ethnicity, gender, and country? So these may be common forms, that questions that would show up on an intake form. But when we look at these now, we really see there's a lot missing, right? So let's sort of talk around that. How do I get even more? Well, this tool in the back of your DSM-5. So if you've got the DSM-5 TR, okay, which is the turquoise one, it's going to start on page 859. Now, I'm going to actually give you a PDF of this document that's going to be attached, that your teacher's going to give you. But in the back, you have access to this information I'm going to show you as well. Okay. The great thing, if you really get into this is another great resource, but not required. This is going to really break down the CFI, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to use as well is going to come from this edition, this handbook on the CFI. Okay, so this is the part of the first page of the cultural formulation interview. You can see that this is set up super easy to use. Literally, like it just talks about, it helps walk the clinician through what to ask. So at Garrett, what we do is we will utilize this in parts as we go through the intake. We will use these as questions to launch. If we hear something, we can use this to launch into a deeper exploration of what the client's bringing up. If I had my magic wand and we had like unlimited sessions and time, I would spend 2 or 3 sessions just going through the CFI with a client using some of the interventions I'm going to show you today. But that's in an ideal world. Most of you are not going to be in a clinical setting where, one, you're going to have time to do that, and two, you may not have even the buy-in from the client to do this. When the exceptions to that could be you have a client who is actually coming to explore values and their culture. If a client, and that's why they're coming, you can get a lot of depth out of using this tool. Okay. So, some of the questions, let's look at them. Number one, what brings you here today? Okay. And then it gives you a probe. So maybe they say, well, I'm coming because my mom made me, or I'm coming because I've been anxious. So the prompt it gives you is people often understand their problems in their own way, which may be similar or different from how a doctor would describe your problem. So how would you describe your problem? Okay. So it could then change to something like, I just can't sleep, or I feel like I'm a nervous wreck all the time. Okay. And then question number two talks about how an individual frames their problems in their society as being a member of their social network. So sometimes people have different ways of describing their problem to their family, friends, or others in their community. How would you describe your problem to them? Now, this is an interesting question because maybe they, depending on their culture, they may be really minimizing their problem, or it could be overload, extreme exaggeration of their problem. For example, if I grew up in a family where the family system itself was always sick, okay, so maybe there was a lot of chronic illness, chronic pain. Maybe there was a lot of mental illness. Maybe there was also a lot of attention given if someone was not feeling well or sick. That family unit within itself may almost build a construct of which, like, it's a default defective model. So you get attention by being unhealthy. Okay. So, this is good insight so you can see, like, okay, where are we coming from? Is it that everyone wants you to be sick and it's easier to be sick than to be well in that model or in that culture? Um, so the other is, or are they minimizing it, right? If I'm in this culture where it's always push, 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 perfection, our family is winners, our family is achievers, you're going to do all these big things. You see this even, maybe we have a family full of military people and everybody goes into the military in our family. That's what expected. Okay. Think about those kinds of settings where everybody's sort of pushed into a box because it's what you do, because you're a member of this family. So they may describe their problem different because they're moving into that culture of these are the things that are expected. Okay. Another question is, what troubles you most about your problem? So I'm going to stop the video here, and then we're going to move on to exploring what troubles you most about your problem.